thought that I was restricting myself or narrowing my options unnecessarily. So I tried to look for other paths, but the subject of architecture always caught up with me. When I visited the Goetheanum in Switzerland last year for a youth conference, I realized that there was no turning back. This was like the mecca of everything Waldorf and Steiner. After taking the tour of the place, I got the impression that there was more to architecture than just designing buildings that looked like those of famous architects. Before, I used to copy designs from architecture magazines or books and get elements from different buildings and put them together to create my own. But the architect of the Goetheanum, Rudolf Steiner, an Austrian thinker and scientist, obviously put so much thought in the architecture of the place that it got me thinking. My being able to place myself in the interior of the Goetheanum and outside of it, in the context of its surroundings, made me realize that there was so much more to architecture that I can discover. How could one building fill me with so much awe? As a result, I finally decided that I will take architecture as my topic. I will choose it as my topic, and that I will focus on design processes, and I will look at the people behind each structure, the designs, and try to see their own processes and their philosophies. Now, a quick definition of architecture. According to Webster's dictionary, architecture is the science, art, or profession of designing and constructing buildings, and so on. We all know that a building is solid. It is a structure that is made to stand and be stable. Builders and engineers make it a point to erect a building that will stay. Architecture is indeed something concrete. For my project, I did not focus on how the concrete was mixed and poured, nor did I venture into the details of nuts and bolts, or sweaty workers in their construction helmets. I focused on the process. I focused on the process of designing, or the architects that went into each creation. Before the school year began, I researched on architecture in all ways possible. I spent my summer in Europe, made time to visit buildings and read books. I also watched movies and videos on YouTube on the subject. We also had our History of Architecture block with Mr. Raymond, who is also an architect. And it was interesting for me to see the evolution of architecture through the years. What captured me most was how architecture began as a product of a whole people's design. The primitive built in a certain way, with lines and curves, for they felt the need to be protected from outer forces. The Gothic era was an age where people sought for faith. And this was seen in their architecture, how they built their buildings with towers that seemed to storm the heavens. Throughout history, man built with a certain uniformity in their architecture, each era being classified with a distinct style. At the break of the Renaissance, architects were individually recognized. Brunelleschi, for example, the architect of the Santa Maria del Fiore and its famous dome in Florence, even had to be sent out of the meeting where he was to present his design because he was so enthusiastic about his work, he wanted to show everyone. And as the modern age came in, more architects emerged with their own styles until today. From the research I did, I decided to focus on 3 architects. They are Rudolf Steiner, a Japanese architect named Tadao Ando, and national architect of the Philippines, Francisco Bobby Manyosa. What struck me most about Steiner is how he really considered the human beings in designing his buildings, that it was created with the human being as model. That Steiner's design will serve the needs of the space. He designed a building that was elliptical in shape, not only because of personal style, but because he believed that it was the most appropriate form for the purpose of the building. Tadao Ando, on the other hand, is an architect born with a strong connection to his Japanese roots and tradition. However, when he did his work, he always took into consideration what other people want or need, feel or believe, despite his own personal style. This allowed the style of Japanese architecture, to not dwell in its traditional past, but to welcome the possibilities of the future generation. And this is something that really captivated me. Lastly, by focusing on the architect Manyosa, I was able to look at something that was present around me. True enough, this is what struck me most about Manyosa, that when he designs a building, one must look and be aware of the circumstances around and how the building will function in a given environment. What is the significance of these three architects? In my endeavor of designing the Manila Waldorf School mess hall, I saw these elements that struck me in my process. So, the mess hall project actually began in March 2013, after Ms. Isa, my mentor, and also my client, asked me to design a mess hall for the school. She suggested that it could be a part of my senior project. Of course I agreed, and I came home that day very happy, and I was excited. I was already designing buildings in my head. I was even researched on the internet. I researched on different mess halls around the world and in different Waldorf schools. By mid-July, during our History of Architecture block, our teacher, Mr. Raymond, announced that the class will provide me inputs in designing the mess hall. The first thing we did was to get the wishes from Kawayan. How do they envision the mess hall? We then collated this with Ms. Isa's requirements or her needs. And the needs are that the mess hall will be a simple hut made of bamboo. It will not exceed a budget of 250,000 pesos. It can accommodate the whole of Kawayan, and the design will be consistent with the surrounding buildings, and also that it will take into consideration the intended function. Now, the wants and the wishes of the demanding Kawayan students are big tables, a small kitchen, glass tables to write on, a sink, a walkway from the Kawayan building to the second floor of the mess hall, irregular shaped windows and doors, built-in shelves, a freedom wall, and lots of electric fans and an aircon. The class then came up with concepts and drafts for the mess hall with all these requirements. I then presented these to Ms. Isa. That was when reality hit me. The designs in my head, the things that I thought of before, those are not the only things that I had to consider. There was a mix of wishes from the students, the budget and needs of my client, and my classmates' drafts and designs to consider. This conundrum of considerations overwhelmed me, and it initially paralyzed me. But I realized that it was a chance for me to not restrict myself, and it gave me more chances to explore, to not be limited by my own ideas. Slowly, I realized that architecture is not only about me, that there are so many things to consider and people to listen to. This was one of the things I struggled with, to go out of myself, to communicate, to connect to people. Although I could probably design it all by myself without any inputs from anyone, the mess hall was not only for me. When I watched the documentary on Japanese architecture, Tadao Ando said, "A great designer is selfless and designs with love." I realized the importance of this, for the architect is someone who creates something not only for his own personal interest or passion, but for others as well. There's so much responsibility involved. Mr. Raymond shared with the class that when you're an architect, you can design a bathroom with a sink where every time you bend down, you will hit your head. Ando had this awareness of the people and the space beyond himself, and this he tried to incorporate in his buildings. He said, "In my architecture, I express how we and nature coexist." With my studies to fall back on, I asked myself, how can the design of the building function best? I then went to the proposed mess hall location and observed it specifically in the morning, recess, and lunch, the times when people would probably use it the most. I observed that there was not much wind in the place and a lot of sun. I could already imagine Hawaiian students complaining about how hot it would be in the place. I mean, they even asked for an aircon and a lot of electric fans in the wish list. Because there was not much wind, it was best to keep the building open, which was something that we really had to work with, because enclosing the space would put us off budget. There was the need for the mess hall's design to be consistent with the surrounding buildings. To me, the most prominent part of the other building is the banana leaf-shaped roof. So I took the shape of the roof, this shape, and I put it on the mess hall. But then I realized that if I did this, it would not address the sunlight directly hitting the building. So what I did was I lowered the roof so that the sun won't hit the building directly. And I discovered that Bobby Manyosa's advocacy for Filipinos to design Filipino was something to be taken into consideration. He does not merely say that architecture should be Filipino, that the whole of architecture should be Filipino, but that one must look at where he is. Architect Arlene Andres, one of Miss Isa's architects, helped me throughout this process. After I showed her my design, she told me to stake out the area or plot out the floor plan. With limited space and the whole kawayan to fit in the mess hall, I had to find ways to maximize the area. I staked out the place and tried to scale it down on paper. But I had a problem because the lines did not meet. So I went to school again and I checked the measurements and they indeed were correct. But again, the lines did not meet when I tried to put them on paper. My client and time kept me under pressure, so I finally submitted my work. After the much-needed advice, the project was finally able to move forward. Architect Arlene advised me that to be able to measure the whole of the mess hall, the floor plan, because it's in a regular shape, we first must use a basic shape to put a rectangle inside it. And it worked. So after much trial and error and fretting over my unsuccessful attempts at correcting my work, I realized how silly I was not to have asked for help in spite of the offers that were given to me. For the interiors, we first thought of putting tables, but we explored other options. As my client, Miss Isa, expressed how she wanted the mess hall to be a chill place for Hawaiian students, this was the inspiration for the seating of the mess hall. This is in Enchanted Farm, Gawad Kalina's Enchanted Farm. When architect Arlene saw this, she asked if it would be a place for theater or performances. And Ms. Isa said that it could be a place for slam poetry readings or jammings. So with this in mind, I designed the seating to be like what we have here right now, like in a theater. But then I realized that the mess hall is a place for people to interact, to be together. And this would just focus everyone in one spot. So what I did was I rounded the seats so that people can look at each other, so they can face each other. With this in mind, so I made the bleachers curved, rounded, to give that gesture of interaction. When I read Steiner's principles behind forms, he expressed how the circle represents unity but also asserts identity. It says, I am here. I was delighted upon discovering this. The mess hall is meant to be a place where people come together, to eat, to exchange stories, to listen to one another. And the form of the bleachers was apt for that purpose. When it came to materials, limitations had to again be taken into consideration. Originally, we wanted the mess hall to be made completely with kawayan, or bamboo, but that would not have been able to support the size of the structure. To give the natural feel of bamboo, the I-beams, which would be used to support the roof, we we planned to cover it with bamboo. The design was finished by mid-September. The next step was to specify which materials to use. And that was where my direct involvement with the mess hall ended. It was also the point where everything I knew really made an impact on me. The importance of making connections, communicating primarily, but most of all, to do. Architecture cannot arise without man doing something, building something. The word itself, architecture, comes from the Greek architekton, which means chief builder. That in itself already speaks how, before a structure can arise, there is man, someone who has to make it happen. For a while, the project was delayed because I dwelled only in my thoughts and I was unable to make things happen. However, I was able to move forward by taking action. When a building is designed and built, it affects many things. I began this project thinking I knew everything about architecture, that it was about design, about form and function, and about very interesting architects. Behind every Goetheanum, or Notre Dame, or mess hall, is an architect, and also people to whom every building will serve. Throughout this project, I have seen how architecture is, as commonly described, the process of designing, planning, and building for different purposes. This is how I have been viewing it for the longest time. But by immersing myself in architecture, I was able to answer the burning question of my project, which is, what is architecture to me? Architecture is finding and making connections in structure, reality, people, and with myself. Architecture is finding and making connections in structure. A roof, walls, doors, floors, ceilings, these things, what are they if they stood alone? The very essence of architecture is that all these individual parts connect or come together to form a building. The intersection of each line or curve, the transition of forms, colors, and material from one space to the next is considered. Each connection is important, for it is what makes up the structure. Architecture is finding and making connections to surroundings. When a building is built, it becomes a part of the environment. Although the mess hall has a different function from the surrounding buildings, it was important to keep in mind that it was still a part of the school. I had to be aware of this so as not to displace the building and be in harmony with the surroundings. Architecture is connecting reality with plans and wishes. To dream and to hope is not wrong. One must also consider reality. When I design, there are so many possibilities that I have in my head. There are so many things that can go on that I can put in the architecture, in the design. When the class and I were designing the mess hall, I was one of the people who wanted to have a walkway from the school building to the second floor of the mess hall. And I was one of those people who even wanted to put glass windows. I often found myself paralyzed when I am confronted by the reality that some plans or wishes cannot be followed. I find myself lost because the things I planned, that I have created in my head, are things that I am fixed at. When these don't happen, I feel like I failed. This is a natural tendency of mine, often telling myself, I'm not good enough. But when people helped me and gave me suggestions or options, I realized that reality offers other possibilities. An example would be when we had to use the I-beams but still opted for a natural look, and architect Arlene suggested to clad it with bamboo. Making this connection that things do not end in my head, make things happen in reality. Architecture is finding and making connections with people. Oftentimes, I was faced with the difficulties of talking to people or showing my work. And I realized that it was because of my being such a perfectionist. I was afraid that when I show it to my client, my mentor, architect Arlene, and even the Hawaiian students, it would not be perfect. And that is when disconnections occur, resulting to missing deadlines, and I am not wanting to consult people anymore. When this happened, things did not move, and the people around me were affected, for they also had other things to do and their own time to manage. This was the reason why my involvement with the mess hall ended, because of being disconnected. In the end, it was something to learn from. It was when I realized how connecting to people is crucial to architecture. I have to be aware of the people around me and conscious of their needs. How did I establish a connection? I think that the few times I went to people to consult, ask for help, or share what I have, those are the times when I trusted myself. But more than that, I think it was because I also trusted others. I trusted that even though my project is not perfect, meeting with them will help me improve it. Architecture is finding and making connections with myself and with others. I did not want to do this project at first. Architecture is something I value and love for as long as I can remember. And people seem to believe and value me so much when I talk about it or show them my sketches or tell them which furniture to buy or even what color of paint that will suit their walls. But I knew deep inside me that I was just touching the surface. There was more to it that I can explore. And I was afraid that if I did venture into it, I would open myself up to criticisms and pain, and I might end up hating it. But I decided to stick to what I love, with hopes of getting something from it, and to share it with people. It was not an easy journey. I hit obstacles, and whenever this happened, I did not want others to be bothered with it. I tried solving them all by myself. I got frustrated, I got angry, I cried. All the things I was afraid would happen really did happen. But when I stopped dwelling in myself, stopped thinking that I can do everything on my own, and connected with others who gave advice, suggestions, or gave encouragements, I was able to move forward. I realized doing things alone is not always the best way to go. I need to connect to people. Because no matter how alone I feel, there will always be something beyond myself. The important thing is to find and make the connections. Acknowledgements, I would like to thank Ms. Isa, my mentor, for not giving up on me and for all her patience. My parents for not disowning me, especially when I turned into the monster daughter no parent wishes to have. Sam for always lending a hand and being the best sister. Tita Mayet, to Ms. Tintin, the whole faculty. My advisor, Mr. Raymond, even though I've only met with you once. Architect Arlene, Engineer Melmar, and Kuya Linor, Carpenter, and also the Kuyas in the school. And to my class, for always keeping the often dwindling hope in me alive. And reminding me what I can do, even though they themselves were having a difficult time. Now for my artistic, I made a scale model of the mess hall. 1:20 scale model of the mess hall, and it is here.
No teachers allowed. Alex.
Teachers
Give
are
her some
asking,
water.
are they allowed inside the mess hall?
Tapos ayaw.
No.
No teachers allowed.
No, it's for the teachers.
Question?